continue on with the incredible German designs. Turbojet bombers of at least probably 30 different configurations that I've discovered, including the forward swept wing, an extremely innovative design that was tested only in the 80s by NASA. Nobody else has ever tried this configuration. It has a lot of, how should I say, it has a lot of positive points relative to the normal backward swept wing. This is a drawing of such a 6-engine bomber. I found a fuzzy photograph of such a bomber finished in Russia and test flown from a Russian airport in '46. Gull wing plane, wings, different engine configurations. All of the major companies were working on these bombers. Engines on top of the wings, forward swept wings by Junkers. This is a manned V1. I never knew that they had manned V1, but it's very important for the German space program because they had also manned V2s. This is a Japanese model of the manned V1, built by Mitsubishi. This is the first rocket plane in the world, the Heinkel 176. It flew even before the turbojet plane in the late 30s. This is an extremely rare photograph of the rocket plane. The pilot lies in a prone position, carried on top of a Dornier bomber, Dornier mothership. Nobody was doing these things from the Allies during the Second World War. The Germans were 50 years ahead in aviation. This is the linear gun that we were talking about, buried deep underground. You can get 20 feet, you can get 120 feet. The longer the tube, the bigger the throw distance. The rocket was about 2 meters long, and it could fire about 150 kilometers length. A little bit less than the V2 rocket. They had several parallel technologies that were similar to the V2 in range. The jet-powered Messerschmitt plane attacking enemy bomber formations were devastating results. But this is a rocket power. The first rocket plane in the world and the first operational rocket fighter. I mean, one of the first and the first operational rocket fighter. Nobody has ever had operational rocket fighters in service to this day, 50 years after the Messerschmitt Comet flew. This is a twin-engine Messerschmitt 263, much more powerful. I suspect that they beat the sound barrier without flames, but they have not, well, how should I say, advertised that much, because with the previous plane they reached 960 kilometers an hour, just basically 100 kilometers less than the sound barrier. And I have a German documentary film on that record, establishing of that record. This is the flying wing turbojet twin-engine Horten fighter bomber with stealth technology. The exhaust of the engine is ahead of the trailing edge, so that a heat-seeking anti-aircraft missile coming from under would not see the glow of the jets. This is exactly how the engines on the B-2 are made 50 years later, after the Horten plane. This is the first supersonic glider. This is the plane that beat the sound barrier. It's not Chuck Yeager with his funny plane, which also was a carbon copy of a German model. This is the first plane. They just dropped it up from a bomber, down from a bomber, and they beat the sound barrier. My best design, a cannon that was firing shells as big as a Volkswagen car. I photographed myself next to one shell in the British War Museum. It had a crew of 1,500 people. It could fire one shell in about an hour and a half. It's not 250, it's 1,500 people.
Is that big burst?
No, this is the Dora, the 8 centimeters war. And they used it only once in the war with devastating results. They demolished the forts of the on the Crimean Peninsula. The Maxim Gorky fort was demolished. These giant guns were just tossed up in the air and fell back into their own concrete foundation. Guns that weighed thousands of tons. The whole structure was demolished by a single shell. They basically annihilated the Russian defenses at Sevastopol. This is where the Maxim Gorky barrier is. I recently found a German artist drawing of what remained of the barrier. It was so devastating the Russians would never publish these photographs. This is a giant ramjet engine, basically a hollow pipe, figured back on top of a Dornier bomber. And recently I found a photograph of it fired in test. These engines were made for a single stage-to-orbit plane, the Zanger Bren suborbital skip bomber, that was probably tested, because this is a photograph of the early 40s. Why the hell did they need these monstrous ramjet engines unless they did some secret research? Because always when something is developed into the army establishment, and if it is too good to be true, it's taken secretly and moved to the secret establishment. It's moved from Peenemünde to, for example, the SSE4 establishment and the secret army establishment that built the flying saucers. Variable geometry swing wings. This is the B-1 bomber. Basically the geometry of the B-1 bomber tested in a wind tunnel. This is the Messerschmitt full variable geometry design. This is a scissor wing variable geometry. I mean, all these things precede what NASA did with 50 years of these. 50 years, it's incredible. We were told that these were the first vertical takeoff planes built by Lockheed, or another model built by Convair. But we would soon see that some of them were built in Germany many years earlier. This is a ramjet fighter plane with a giant 1 meter diameter ramjet, possibly a supersonic plane. The pilot is lying in a prone position over the engine with 2 machine guns under his armpits, literally. And the plane runs on coal, powderized coal. Anybody heard about a fighter plane, of a jet plane flying on coal, powderized coal? They didn't have fuel at the end of the war. Coal, my dear. We have not to forget that the V-2 was hitting London with alcohol made out of fermented mashed potatoes. Mashed potato power. They had a whole factory that was producing alcohol out of mashed potatoes. They didn't have fuel. Here's the German vertical takeoff rocket plane that would fire its rocket at the bombers, and after all the rockets are exhausted, then the pilot would crash the plane, catapulting in the last moment. The engines would be separated and dropped down by parachute. This is a plywood expendable plane, basically. And this is the finished construction. Very often I would find just a rumor or a drawing of something. Then time passes and I found the first photograph. Nah, it never flew. It was only created. It never flew. But then you see the thing on the launching pad. And then you see the pilot getting in and the thing being launched. This is a manned version of the V-2 rocket. It looks like a rocket, but there is no rocket engine on the bottom. This is a giant helicopter with a propeller midship driven by 3 ramjet engines. I mean, incredible designs. Incredible. It could beat, it was 960 kilometers horizontal power, almost reaching the speed of sound. And this is the Nutter rocket-driven vertical takeoff plane.